They fined me $500 for letting my grieving daughter hold a fishing rod. $500 for the one quiet hour where her shoulders finally loosened and she remembered how to smile. If you've ever had a petty tyrant turn your safe place into a battlefield, type $500 in the comments, because that number started a war I didn't plan to lose. My name is Remy Thorncroft. 2 months earlier, I had checked every box on the brochure version of life: 15 years in venture capital, exits in tech, early retirement at 42. None of that taught me how to sleep next to the empty side of the bed after cancer took my wife, Rachel. None of that fixed the way my 14-year-old, Solene, stared out car windows like the world was happening to someone else. We found one thing that didn't hurt: fishing. Rachel loved that dock quiet line in water silence. The last week we had together, we caught bluegill and laughed like time wasn't hunting us. So when I went house shopping, I filtered for one requirement: only water I could walk to. Lakeside estates looked perfect. Neat streets, polished lawns, a 6-acre lake sitting in the middle like a promise. The realtor said there was an HOA, the usual keep the grass short, keep the paint tasteful, then did a tiny pause before adding that the president, Karen Wellington, was very dedicated to maintaining property values. I had survived boardrooms full of egos and crocodile smiles. I figured I could survive a cul-de-sac with a newsletter. The first Saturday of April, the water was glass. Sunlight stitched little gold threads across the ripples, and for the first time in weeks, Solene's laugh didn't sound forced. She eased a bluegill off the hook, whispering, "Sorry, little guy," as she slipped it back. Then a voice hit us like a gavel. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" She wore athleisure you could finance a car with, and a haircut that always wants a manager. Tablet in hand, smile like a door chain. I offered a handshake. Just fishing with my daughter, Remy, new on Sycamore Drive. She didn't touch my hand. Tap tap on the tablet. Fishing is explicitly prohibited on the community lake. Regulation amended last month. I'm Karen Wellington, HOA president. This is a violation. The fine is $500. I felt Solene go still beside me. I said there must be a mistake. The realtor had called fishing an amenity. Karen rotated the tablet to show a PDF titled Amendment to Recreational Use of Community Lake, dated 4 weeks ago. All residents were notified via email, she said, like a prosecutor resting her case. Ignorance is not an excuse. Check your spam folder. I asked why the sudden ban. She started talking about environmental and safety concerns, hooks injuring wildlife, the smell of bait, disturbing residents sipping coffee on their patios. Her eyes did a quick inventory of our tackle box like it was a biohazard. Then she added a line that slid right under my skin. New residents sometimes struggle to adapt to our community culture, people who are more accustomed to different types of neighborhoods. Solene's eyes filled. That's the part that burned. This wasn't about a rule. This was about making us small. I told Karen we'd pack up, asked her to email the updated regs and the invoice. Her smile said, victory, the way a cat smiles at a bird bath. Back home, I opened every folder, inbox, promotions, spam, trash, no notice, nothing but lawn care coupons, and a reminder from a streaming service I keep forgetting to cancel. I printed the HOA documents anyway. The covenants, the bylaws, the amendments that look official even when they're just dressed up control. I read until my coffee went cold. The lake was listed as common property for the enjoyment of all residents. The HOA could set rules for safety and maintenance under a lease agreement with the original developer. Lease. That word blinked. At sunset, I stared out our back window and watched a party at the lakeside gazebo. Music. Laughter. Wine glasses catching orange light. Karen at the center like a hostess on a magazine page. So, environmental concern didn't apply to amplified speakers and open bars, but it did apply to a barbless hook and a teenage girl trying to remember her mother. Got it. If you've ever felt that heat rise in your chest, the kind that says, not today, hit the like button, so this story finds the people who need it. Because I made a decision right there. I wasn't going to teach Solene that bullies win if they sound official. I was going to teach her what to do when someone weaponizes rules. The next morning, I met an older gentleman walking his dog past our mailbox. He introduced himself as Merrick, 3 doors down, retired attorney. When I mentioned the fishing fine, his face did a little weather change. He said, "Ah, you've met our neighborhood monarch." Then, quieter, "Come by for coffee. I'll show you how the crown got made." His living room smelled like good beans and old books. On the table, manila folders, sticky notes, highlighted lines. Merrick explained what most neighbors never read past page 1 to learn that the lake wasn't owned by the HOA. It was owned by Meridian Development Corporation, the builder. The HOA leased recreational use for 30 years, and the clock, he said, was almost out. Less than 2 months left. Renewal wasn't automatic. I asked what happens when it expires. He said Meridian could renew, sell to the HOA, or sell to someone else. He also mentioned whispers that Meridian was cash tight. Projects stalled, debt stacked, assets quietly sold to whoever could pay fastest. And Karen, Merrick said, she knows how to sniff a weak flank. The phrase sat there like a map. I went home and started my own brand of due diligence. Business filings, county records, meeting minutes people forget live on the internet forever. I found Karen's day job, owner of a boutique real estate firm fronting a web of LLCs with names that sound like wallpaper patterns. Lakeside Investments, Sierra Vista Holdings, Wellington Properties. I pulled up social posts of her hosting waterfront parties at the same shoreline where she'd slapped me with a fine. Community atmosphere, she called it in one caption, standing in front of a champagne bucket. I kept reading the governing documents until I reached the part that mattered. The HOA controlled usage only through the lease. The lake itself belonged to whoever held the deed. The deed did not say HOA. The anger started to cool into something sharper. Money teaches you one harsh truth. Systems aren't sacred, they're engineered. People like Karen bank on most neighbors being busy, tired, polite. They weaponize that politeness. I've seen what happens in boardrooms when someone with a clipboard says policy and everyone else nods. The fix is simple. Learn the policy better than the person using it against you. So, I built a binder. I labeled tabs like I was prepping for trial. Lease. Amendments. Violations. Financial ties. I marked one tab with a question mark and wrote, "Who actually owns the water?" Because if the HOA just rented the right to control it, then the landlord's signature decided the future, not Karen's clipboard. That night, I stood on our porch with Solene. The party had quieted to clinks and low talk. She asked why that lady hated us. I told her some people love rules more than people, but rules can be rewritten. She asked how. I said, "You read the fine print, then you flip it." She smiled. Small, but it was there. I went back inside and opened a fresh document on my laptop. Title: Lakeside Ownership Pathways. Bullet 1. Confirm Meridian status. Bullet 2. Identify renewal terms. Bullet 3. If asset is distressed, explore acquisition. I didn't know if it would work yet. I only knew this. If the lake was the last place my family felt whole, I would figure out who held the keys, and I would take them out of Karen Wellington's hand. The next morning, I took Merrick up on that coffee invite, and that's when the curtain really lifted on the theater of Lakeside Estates. His house smelled like cinnamon and quiet defiance. The walls were lined with law books and pictures of a man who used to fight bigger bullies than our HOA president. He poured my coffee, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You've got money and a conscience. That combination tends to scare people like Karen." Then he pulled out a folder thick enough to make a judge sigh. Inside were documents that spelled out everything the HOA didn't want residents to know. The lake wasn't HOA property at all. It was leased from Meridian Development Corporation, the original builder, under a 30-year recreational agreement that was about to expire. And when it does, Merrick said, tapping a line highlighted in neon yellow, Meridian can sell the lake to anyone they want, including your new best friend, Miss Wellington. I stared at the page, trying to process the absurdity of it. The HOA was acting like royalty over something they didn't even own. "Let me guess," I said. "Karen's trying to buy it for herself?" He nodded. "Through her company. Not for the community. For her own profit." That's when Samuel Washington walked in, holding a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of calm you only see in people who've outlived scandal. Retired banker, soft voice, sharp eyes. Merrick said he'd been keeping records data on HOA violations, board spending, house sales. "I started out just tracking payments," Samuel said, opening his laptop, "but patterns have a way of showing themselves if you look long enough." On his screen were spreadsheets, colored like warning lights, names, addresses, violations, sale prices. One column stood out, violation frequency per homeowner. The numbers for minority residents were triple the community average. Discrimination disguised as paperwork, Samuel said quietly. She calls it preserving standards. I call it fraud, wrapped in HOA language. Another tab showed 6 homes that had been forced into quick sales after repeated fines, all ending up under shell companies tied to Guess Who Wellington properties. Renovated, relisted, and flipped for fat margins. "She's been running this scam for years," Merrick added. "Scare people out, scoop up their homes, sell them as premium Lakeview lots. And now the lake itself is her jackpot. It wasn't paranoia, it was a business model. And every violation notice was just another line on her profit and loss sheet. That night, I went home with a folder full of receipts and a head full of anger sharpened into purpose. I made a burner email and created a private chat group for the few neighbors I already knew weren't part of Karen's fan club. Merrick called it our underground HOA. Within days, word spread quietly. People started sharing their own stories, like they'd been waiting years for someone to ask. James, a retired teacher, said he got fined for excessive holiday lights after he spoke against Karen at a town hall. Maria, a nurse raising foster kids, told us her children were banned from the pool for being too loud. Diana, a young widow, got 5 violation notices in 1 week each for things her next-door neighbor, a friend of Karen's, also had, but was never cited for. Every story had the same rhythm. Challenge the queen, get punished. We met in secret, sometimes in Merrick's study, sometimes in the back of Maria's bakery after closing, once even in the library's windowless reading room. We passed around phone photos of violation letters, copies of board emails, even a few voice recordings of Karen's condescending advice. The group grew from 4 to 10, then 20. Every new member brought evidence and rage. Samuel took charge of organizing everything. "If we're going to fight," he said, "we fight like auditors. Facts first." He built a digital archive that cross-referenced every HOA fine for the past 8 years. The patterns were undeniable. Karen's friends were clean, everyone else was dirtied up. And then came the bombshell. Meridian Development was broke. Samuel's banking contacts whispered that their latest commercial project tanked after COVID, leaving them desperate for liquidity. They were trying to offload remaining residential assets, including our lake, for whatever cash they could get. Value, around $300,000. Merrick leaned back, smiling like a man who'd just seen the trapdoor under the villain's throne. "If she wants the lake, she's going to need cash fast, and if Meridian's bleeding, they'll take the first real offer that shows up with a pen and a checkbook." I wasn't smiling yet, but I was thinking. This was my world, the language of distressed assets, leverage, and timing. I knew exactly how desperate executives behaved when the numbers went red. Karen thought she was playing small-town politics. She didn't realize she'd picked a fight with someone who used to buy and sell companies like hers before breakfast. Still, the more we dug, the uglier it got. Karen had already started her endgame months earlier. The HOA had quietly voted to raise maintenance fees to create a reserve fund for lake restoration, her way of generating down payment money under the radar. Meanwhile, she told the community it was for shoreline beautification. Translation: building luxury homes on the waterline after she bought it. I asked Merrick what would happen if the lease simply expired before she closed the deal.
So
then the
would
property
mean the
reverts
property
fully
would
to
revert
Meridian, he said.
Exactly.
And they can sell it to anyone they want.
goes back to them.
Even me? He smirked.
Even me.
Especially you, if you've got the cash.
Especially you.
That night, I sat in my home office, staring at the dark lake outside. Karen's house lights glittered across the water like little teeth. I thought about Rachel and how she used to say every storm reveals who built their house right. Karen built hers on greed. I could already see the cracks. So, I wrote a plan on a legal pad. Step 1, verify Meridian's distress. Step 2, confirm expiration date of HOA lease. Step 3, wait until Karen commits publicly. Step 4, outbid her and take the lake from under her feet. Simple.
Ruthless.
Ruthless.
Fair.
By the following week, our underground group had grown into a full-on resistance. Samuel managed a secure chat for 30 families. We started calling ourselves the Lakeside Coalition. The name felt dramatic, but so was what we were up against. Every few days, new evidence dropped: screenshots, recordings, even drone photos of HOA board parties at the lake featuring banned activities like alcohol and open fires. The hypocrisy was its own bonfire. Merrick was ecstatic, muttering about RICO patterns and civil liability. Samuel drafted a document to present to state HOA regulators when the time came. I offered something different: patience and precision.
We analyze.
We can't go at her head on yet, I said. We let her dig the hole deeper. The more she believes she's untouchable, the more spectacular her fall will be. But patience didn't mean peace. Karen seemed to sense rebellion in the air. Her emails turned sharper, her fines pettier. She started inspecting lawns with a tape measure and showing up unannounced at people's doors. She even began dropping hints in community newsletters about certain residents spreading misinformation. The neighborhood started to split those terrified to speak, and those ready to burn down the HOA, metaphorically if they had to. Meanwhile, I had my eyes on the bigger board: Meridian, the lake, the clock. And that ticking sound wasn't just the lease running out, it was Karen's countdown to her own undoing. Robert Chen chose a coffee shop 20 miles away, the kind of place where the barista knows everyone by first name except us. He slid into the booth across from me and didn't waste words. She's got a 60-day exclusive negotiation window with Meridian, he said, stirring nothing into his coffee. Karen pitched herself as the community savior. Reality? She's scrambling for investors, collateral, anything that moves. Meridian is bleeding and wants out yesterday. If a clean all-cash offer lands on the desk, they'll break the exclusive on a technicality and close fast. He raised an eyebrow. Is that the face of a man with wires to the money? If you're listening and you've ever watched a bully overextend on credit, drop a TikTok in the comments, because the clock had just started keeping time for me. I asked him for the real number, not the brochure price. 300, he said. They'll call it 350 for optics, but 300 gets the CFO to breathe.
It's fine.
Problem is, Karen's offer is structured like a juggling act: 18 months, mezzanine financing, a prayer. He lowered his voice. You walk in with a cashier's check, they'll hand you the pen.
Correct. Execute
I
immediately.
didn't walk, I ran. Not literally, but my calls moved like I had a helicopter. By sundown, I had a single-purpose LLC ready: Thorncroft Holdings, neat and quiet, a clean bank line, counsel on standby. I told Robert to set the meeting. Make it boring on paper, I said. Boring closes. Drama gets you voicemails. Karen must have smelled the shift in the wind, because the next week felt like living under a magnifying glass. Violation notices started landing like hail. Improper weed control 100. Unauthorized landscaping materials 200. Mailbox paint shade taupe versus the right taupe 200 more. My favorite? A citation for temporary obstruction because Solene left her bike in the driveway and ran inside when her phone buzzed. The notice included time-stamped photos, which meant someone had eyes on our house. You ever had a stranger measure your life with a ruler? That's what HOA abuse feels like. The pressure seeped into places rules shouldn't reach. Solene came home with tear-glossed eyes. Brianna's mom said, "We don't belong here," she whispered. She told people you're trying to bring down property values. I almost packed boxes that night. The gut-level urge to shield your kid is louder than any strategy. If you've had to choose between a plan and your child's peace, tell me I'm not alone. Then Robert texted 3 words that turned the volume down on panic. Environmental assessment, clean. Meridian had run their standard tests, no hidden liabilities. No bad chemicals waiting to bankrupt a new owner. The CFO called me the next day. We met in a quiet conference room downtown. Just me, Robert, and a man who looked like he hadn't slept since Q2. I didn't pitch. I presented a number. $350,000, all cash, 7-day close. He exhaled, like someone had cracked a window. "You understand this could get noisy," he said, meaning Karen. I smiled. Noise is her love language. Paperwork is mine. He signed the preliminary agreement. We left with a handshake and an email trail. If you've ever felt the floor tilt back in your favor, that's the exact angle it took. While the lawyers papered the deal, Karen went from petty to performative. Appeals I filed against the bogus fines were lost, then denied, then never received. An emergency inspection appeared for my deck, built a decade ago by the previous owners. Suddenly, a municipal priority thanks to the mayor's cousin in code enforcement. My mailbox got measured. My grass got photographed. Someone slid an unsigned note under my door. Some communities just aren't a fit. I kept the note. I keep everything. I also kept reading. The HOA rules, their amendments, the state statutes under them. That's when I found the fuse Karen had been lying about. She'd teased a special assessment for lake improvements, a cash pump for her private purchase, telling neighbors it needed a simple board majority. The bylaws said otherwise. Any special assessment for capital projects tied to common amenities required 75% of homeowners. Not a majority. A mountain. She was counting on nobody doing the math out loud. The Meridian deal crossed its last T in 48 hours. Funds wired. Papers signed. Title recorded to Thorncroft Holdings, LLC. I stood outside after the call and looked at a body of water that legally belonged to me and thought of Rachel.
Oh, that's hilarious.
We used to joke about buying a cabin by a lake. I never pictured buying the lake itself. Power isn't always victory. Sometimes it's a tool you hold very carefully because someone smaller is watching. I waited for relief to hit. What hit first was responsibility. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Karen had scheduled a splashy vision presentation,
Yes.
posters and renderings and buzzwords about elevating Lakeside. Let it happen. Let her strut. The more she promised, the further she'd have to fall. I told exactly 2 people, Merrick, who grinned like a fox who'd just found the henhouse keys, and Samuel, who asked for one thing, time to line up the receipts. Karen responded to the rising murmur of dissent with sharper teeth. People in our coalition woke
It's
up to
1
tape
millimeter
measures
too
in their
long.
flower beds. Maria got fined because her lawn was a 1/4 inch too high. Karen brought her own ruler. James got a letter about a bird feeder that had hung untouched for 10 Christmases. Diana was cited for improper trash alignment because her recycling bin sat 6 inches too close to the garage. It would be farce if it weren't stress. Funny how weaponized tedium can grind a person down. The neighborhood began to split like ice. Some people were exhausted. Ashamed to admit
I
they
can't
were
say this
afraid of a
publicly, but
woman with a
thank you.
clipboard.
We've needed someone to
Others
push back
started
for a
forwarding
long time.
emails to our group at midnight. I can't say this publicly, one message read, but thank you. We've needed someone to push back for a long time. Samuel kept our archive meticulous. He charted violation spikes next to HOA votes and mapped them against property sales. The pattern looked like a heart monitor during a panic attack peaks every time Karen needed leverage. At school, the whispers ticked up. Solene sat alone at lunch twice in 1 week. I came within a phone call of a realtor. I even drafted the message in my head. We're moving for family reasons. But that night, the title company emailed the final confirmation. Deed recorded, clear, no encumbrances. You own the lake, Robert wrote, unnecessarily, but beautifully. I put my phone down and went to Soline's room. "We're not leaving," I told her. "Sometimes the way out is through." She nodded, brave in the way kids learn to be when the adults finally act like adults. With the deed in my desk drawer, my focus sharpened. I hired a water quality consultant to test the runoff and a security firm to map camera placement around the shoreline. Not to weaponize, just to stop lies before they start. I also drafted a restoration plan that read like a promise. Native plants along the bank, catch and release guidelines, a kids' ecology class on Saturdays. If we were going to take something from Karen, we were going to give something back to everyone else. The final piece clicked when I printed the page about special assessments and highlighted the 75% requirement in electric yellow. I could already hear Karen's voice selling the community a majority myth. I pictured the room when I'd read the line aloud. I pictured the silence that follows truth when it's simple and written down. So, I waited. Karen polished her crown and lined up her slides. The mayor smiled from a distance. The board rehearsed their nods. And the lake, my lake, stayed very quiet, like water does when it knows a storm is close and chooses calm anyway. If you're still with me, hit the bell or whatever keeps this story in your feed, because the reveal wasn't subtle. It was a light switch. And once it flipped, no one in Lakeside Estates would ever see Karen the same way again. Karen didn't ease into her next move, she kicked the door in. The emergency HOA meeting arrived with a subject line that read, like a sales pitch, "Elevating Lakeside Estates, a premier vision." Translation: Open your wallets, trust the Queen. She stood at the podium under soft lighting, hair sprayed into place like a promise, and rolled through slides that turned our lake into a brochure. Strategic reimagining, she called it. A curated shoreline experience. The fee hike would be temporary and necessary, $50 more per month from every home, supposedly for critical maintenance. She never mentioned her private negotiations with Meridian. She never mentioned that the maintenance would pave a runway for her personal development play. She didn't have to. She wore confidence like armor and tossed around words that make polite people nod. She also couldn't resist sharpening her teeth on me. Without using my name, Karen warned the room about certain new elements, sowing division and financially unstable residents who might be attempting to undermine our values. The crowd did its quiet suburban murmur. Some glanced at me, some didn't. Samuel rose and spoke calmly, correcting the record on the HOA's finances and reminding everyone that special assessments required more than a board nod and a buzzword. Karen smiled sweetly and brought up a years-old IRS mix-up Samuel had already resolved, framing it like a moral failing. Gaslight, distract, humiliate her greatest hits album. Here's the thing about power built on performance. It needs an audience, so Karen booked a bigger stage. Flyers went up for an original homeowners appreciation party at the lake. That Saturday catered food, music, 2 wine bars, thinly disguised as a loyalty rally. Guest list by invitation to preserve space. Translation: If you moved in after the HOA learned your name, try again next time. I spent Friday finishing the work that mattered. My attorney finalized the documents to terminate the recreational use agreement early based on maintenance violations years of chemical runoff ignored, algae blooms brushed off as aesthetic issues, 0 credible water management reports on file. We didn't need to terminate early. It expired in 28 days. But bullies get bold around a finish line. I preferred clarity. I also had water quality results in a binder, elevated phosphates and nitrates consistent with over-fertilized lawns washing into the lake. Not catastrophic, not yet, but trending wrong. Environmental concerns weaponized against a grieving father, while real environmental neglect simmered. That binder was a mirror when people looked into it. I wanted them to see who actually cared about the water. Saturday arrived glowing and smug. A rental van backed up to the shoreline gazebo. Tables unfolded, white linens flowed. Someone fussed with Bluetooth speakers until the bass said, "Look at us." Karen moved among the clusters like a campaign poster, dispensing laughter and kisses on the cheek. The signs on the wine bars said, "Members only." Members of what? The kingdom of looked the other way. Merrick met me by the sycamore. His tie looked like a verdict. Samuel came straight from church clothes into general mode. Calm eyes, witness, face on. My attorney tucked the termination notice into a slim folder. Officer Reynolds joined us at the curb, invited, briefed, neutral in the way good officers are when the law is about to speak louder than the noise. We didn't sneak. We walked across the grass at an ordinary human pace. People noticed in waves, the way wind moves across water. Karen saw us, smile still pinned in place by habit, and started toward the mic. I got there first. "Good afternoon, neighbors," I said, voice steady enough to carry without shouting. "Quick housekeeping. If you're holding a glass, please keep it. You'll need your hands free in a minute." Karen reached for the microphone with a hostess laugh. "This is a private community event, Mr. Thorncroft. You weren't invited." I kept the mic, looked at the faces in front of me, some curious, some irritated, some already tired of being told what to think. "There's been a misunderstanding," I said. "About who gets to do the inviting." I nodded to my attorney, who placed the folder in my hand. As of 3 days ago, the legal owner of this lake and the 10-foot perimeter around it is Thorncroft Holdings, LLC. A hush fell like a dropped blanket. That's my company. As such, I'm notifying you that this is private property. Under the terms of the recreational use agreement, which expires in 28 days, and in light of multiple maintenance violations, I am terminating the HOA's access effective immediately. It was like flicking a light and watching an entire room remember physics. Karen's face went the color of the tablecloths. "You can't terminate access," she snapped. "The community has rights. The community has been lied to," I answered, not unkindly. "And I'm looking forward to restoring actual community rights. But this party, right now, is trespassing. Officer Reynolds is here to help everyone exit politely." I held up the signed notice. 15 minutes should do it." The first sound wasn't outrage. It was confusion. Then came the questions from the edges. "He owns the lake? Since when?" I thought the HOA, followed by the little crack that happens when a myth snaps. A man near the charcuterie table asked to see the paperwork. I showed him the deed. He read the name, read it again, and looked at Karen like he just checked the magician's sleeves and found the card taped to her wrist. Karen lunged for her fallback, authority clothed as certainty. "Even if you own the deed, the HOA controls usage," she said, voice amplified but thinner now. I flipped the termination letter toward her. "Controlled," I said, past tense. "Also, a housekeeping note for everyone. Special assessments for capital improvements require 75% homeowner approval. That's not a rumor, that's your bylaws in black and white. If you were promised quick upgrades funded by a simple majority, you weren't told the truth." The sound that followed wasn't cheering and it wasn't booing. It was the low boil of a room, comparing what they'd heard with what they were seeing. People started packing plates quietly, the way passengers pack when a pilot says unexpected delay. A couple of Karen's closest allies tried for bravado and fizzled at the edges. One of them muttered, "We'll sue." Merrick, louder than he needed to be, said, "On what grounds? Fraud by disappointment?" Officer Reynolds did what good officers do. He kept things human. "Folks, let's head out," he said, gentle as a school crossing. "This isn't a scene, it's just paperwork getting honored." As the crowd thinned, a longtime resident brushed past me and said, "About time someone measured her rules with a ruler." Another whispered, "We wondered how long she'd keep getting away with it. You don't know how many allies you have until the fear breaks in half." When the last speaker clicked off and the last linen came down, Karen stood on the grass like a monument losing its plaque. She tried a final swing. "You're destroying community value." I held up the binder with the water tests. "I'm fixing actual value," I said. "Water you can trust. A shoreline that won't collapse into algae. Kids learning what an ecosystem is instead of learning how to stay off someone's nerves. That's value." She said she would call the mayor. I told her I'd already emailed his office, the deed and the termination notice, along with photos of unpermitted events on the shoreline under HOA watch. You like rules, Karen, I said. So do I. Let's keep them straight. The party limped to a stop. The gazebo emptied. The lake exhaled. I walked the 10-foot perimeter with Officer Reynolds and my attorney, not as a victory lap, just to feel the edges of what I had just made real. Then I stood alone for a minute and listened to the kind of quiet you get after a hard truth finally says its name out loud. By Monday morning, the ripples turned into waves. Renderings of Karen's lake lounge leaked into neighborhood group chats. The shaded rectangles that ate 20% of open water, the private membership terms dressed up as amenities, the way the fishing spots vanished under deck space and glass. People who had smiled politely at her speeches started messaging us privately with subject lines like, "I didn't know," and "What now?" The mayor's office tried a soft press release about zoning discussions, which Merrick shredded before lunch with 2 citations and a paragraph that translated to, "Absolutely not." I hired a small security team to install cameras along the shoreline, not to play gotcha, just to stop the narrative from getting hijacked again. No trespassing signs went up at measured intervals because clarity prevents conflict. I scheduled meetings with a local conservation group and a biology teacher from the high school, and we drafted an outline for Saturday morning ecology classes for kids. If you take something away, you owe people something real in return. We weren't building a velvet rope around water. We were building a reason for kids to touch it and care. Karen kept swinging in the days that followed. An emergency legal committee convened in whispers. A threatened injunction fizzled on contact with the deed. Someone floated the phrase eminent domain in a chat. Merrick laughed so hard he cried, then filed a letter that read like a brick wall in polite English. Meanwhile, the neighborhood's tone changed by degrees you could measure. Less deference in emails. More questions at the end of sentences. The air when you walk past a house where people have stopped agreeing to nonsense. I didn't gloat. I didn't grandstand. I took calls, answered questions, and sent copies of the bylaws to anyone who asked. The lake went still in the evenings like it was learning a new name. And somewhere between one sunset and the next, the story stopped being Karen's show. It started being ours. By Tuesday, the shoreline wore new truth like a uniform. Signs went in private property. No trespassing clean font. No swagger. A small security team started quiet rounds. Not to scare people, just to stop the petty gotchas before they started. I called the local paper and stood by the water with a clipboard that actually meant something. "We're turning this lake into a living classroom," I told the reporter. The numbers don't lie. Phosphates and nitrates are high from lawn chemicals. We're planting native grasses, restoring the bank, and opening a kids program on Saturdays so they learn the difference between a rule and a responsibility. If you've ever wanted your neighborhood to be more than a postcard, drop a "restore it" in the chat, because this is how you trade theatrics for care. The reaction wasn't instant applause. It was confusion, suspicion, then curiosity. People had been trained to cheer whatever the HOA blessed and side-eye whatever it didn't. But when our test results posted on the community board and a biology teacher commented that they'd been trying to get the HOA to address runoff for years, heads started turning. The next day, a parent messaged asking if her son could bring a friend to the ecology class. Another neighbor offered to donate buckets, nets, and gloves. The mood shifted from "Who gave you permission?" to "What should we bring?" Karen, of course, went on offense. She filed a lawsuit accusing me of destroying community value. It died in court like a sparrow hitting glass. The deed and the expired lease ended that flight fast. She pushed the board to issue new fines against me, then floated a lien idea that fizzled when 2 board members refused to sign. She tried to bend the mayor's ear into a zoning squeeze, and that press whisper evaporated under the sunlight of plain statutes. When performance loses audience, it gets louder. Louder didn't help. The first real crack came at the next HOA meeting. The room looked different, more folded arms, fewer bobblehead nods. Sapphira, who'd spent years being nice for the sake of peace, stood up and told the room exactly where their money went. Last year, we spent $80,000 renovating a pocket park that serves 10 homes, she said, voice shaking, then steady. Those homes all belong to Karen's friends. The main park, where dozens of families play, keeps getting bumped off the agenda. The floor tilted. A few people tried to argue priorities, and Safira calmly held up the budget lines. Numbers don't blush, they just sit there and make you pick a side. Once one person breaks the sound barrier of fear, the rest remember how to speak. A retired couple described fines for a yard gnome that apparently offended the aesthetic gods. A young family shared how a board member told them their kind of people should keep their trash cans invisible if they wanted to fit in. A dad read aloud the clause on special assessments like he was reading a text from a disappointed parent. 75% homeowner approval for capital projects. A murmur went around that sounded like people counting lies they'd been told and adding tax. I didn't need to add gasoline. I brought water and receipts. Samuel submitted a tidy packet violation statistics by street and demographic, dates of citations cross-referenced with public criticism, properties that mysteriously changed hands through the LLC Hall of Mirrors. Merrick followed with a guide for an independent audit and a draft for term limits, conflict of interest disclosures, and a community ethics committee. The board tried to table it. The room said no. Then I opened a different folder and laid out my quietest move yet, the one I hadn't told anyone but 2 people about. Over the last month, I had been buying mortgage notes legally, cleanly, from a bank that wanted to trim its book. Nearly 20% of the homes in Lakeside Estates now owed payments to entities owned by Thorncroft Holdings, including the house on the corner with the white columns and the name W on the mailbox. I said one sentence and watched silence take the oxygen. I have no intention of foreclosing on anyone or calling in debts. In fact, I'm offering below-market refinancing to every homeowner after the HOA is reformed. Was it leverage? Yes. Was it coercion? No. It was a promise with conditions fix the thing that breaks people, and the money stops being a weapon and starts being a tool. Some faces went pale, not from fear of me, but from realizing how trapped they'd been in Karen's cycle. Others looked relieved to hear a way out that didn't involve moving trucks at midnight. Karen tried one last script flip. She spread a rumor that the lake was dangerous, contaminated, unsafe for kids. I posted the full lab results with the biologist's explanation in plain English and a schedule of what we were doing to fix the real problems. Then the cameras earned their keep. One night, 3 figures slipped along the bank with flashlights. The footage caught everything. The bottle, the pour, the face that turned to check the dark and forgot the lens. I sent the video to the police with a cover note. Potential environmental tampering on private property. Trespassing charges landed. An investigation into attempted contamination followed. Once the warrant opened the HOA's financial drawers, dust flew. Misuse of funds. Selective enforcement written into emails like confession. A text thread that read like a petty monarchy. The boardroom smelled like smoke and excuses. Resignations rolled in like a slow thunder. Veronica, who had once avoided eye contact with me at the pool, showed up at my door with a tight smile and asked whether her son could join the kids program if she stepped down from the board. "We start Saturday at 9, I said. She was gone from the board by Friday. 2 more followed. The votes began to feel less like theater and more like a community remembering it could govern itself. We held a meeting at my house, not a rally, not a victory parade. Chairs on the lawn, lemonade. Almost every family came. I stepped up with 3 pages and 3 conditions. 1. Full restructure of the HOA term limits, transparent ballots, open meetings. 2. A ground-up rewrite of the rules with fairness built in, not painted on. 3. An independent ethics committee with rotating seats and no insiders guarding insiders. In return, I would transfer the lake into a community trust that locked public access in perpetuity and kept profiteers out. People looked at each other, then back at me. The votes weren't close. Change passed like a clean wind. I saved one announcement for last. This lake needs a name that isn't a sales pitch, I said. It needs a name that remembers why we fight for places like this. We called it Rachel's Lake. The sign went up small and simple. The first Saturday after, kids lined the dock with buckets and wide eyes, while a teacher showed them how to spot dragonfly larvae and count rings on a bluegill's scales. Solene stood beside me with a clipboard and a grin that didn't crack at the edges. If you've ever lost someone and then found a piece of them in what you built, you know that feeling when your chest finally drops the stone it's been carrying. Karen left her post under a cloud that wasn't rumor anymore. Charges moved, civil suits stacked. Her real estate brand, once smooth, got sticky with facts. She listed her house. The offers did not flood in. The mayor announced he wouldn't seek re-election. People started reading bylaws like bedtime stories, not because they were fun, but because they were ours. I turned the mortgage notes into help instead of heat. Families refinanced, late fees vanished, pressure dropped. You could feel it in the way neighbors waved again. We weren't fixed, not magically, but we were facing the same direction. The lake looked different at dusk, not because the water changed color, but because the people standing around it did. 1 year later, Rachel's Lake sits in our town paper next to a headline about HOA reform model spreads. Other neighborhoods call to ask how we did it. The answer isn't romantic. We read the rules. We told the truth. We waited for the right moment, and we didn't blink. Power can be loud, but it can also be paperwork, patience, and a clean line on a deed. The next few seconds stretched so long it felt like the rain itself was holding still. I saw Vince's free hand inch lower, his fingers brushing the hilt of a folding knife clipped to his belt. The movement was small. Anyone else might have missed it, but I'd seen it 100 times before. The subtle draw right before the strike. I didn't give him the chance. The Glock bucked once in my hands. The muzzle flashed, just a pale bloom against the storm.